All right, are you ready for a really unpopular opinion? I don't care about reducing achievement gaps in education. Bear with me. Stick it out. Hopefully, when you hear why I don't care about reducing the achievement gap or any achievement gap in education, it'll make sense, right? Give me some time here. Now, first reason why I'm not interested in reducing the achievement gap. I think that's the wrong goal. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say we have some sort of strategy and we implement it in a school to try to reduce a gap between two groups of students. And what happens is because of that intervention, this group goes up 5%. We go, hey, great, 5% improvement in our outcomes and our achievement. But this group goes up 10%. Well, I've failed. I've exacerbated the achievement gap, right? Maybe they go up 20%. The achievement gap's got worse. So I go, well, that intervention failed. I would be in the back of that meeting going, hang on, we just raised the achievement of all our students. Isn't that our job as teachers? Isn't that our job as educators? I'd go, that's a success. So the focus on reducing the achievement gap is the wrong focus. Again, another example, if we say, imagine that happened, right? You go, okay, all right, this time we're going to have a new intervention, but we're going to take deliberate strategies to stop this group from achieving any higher, so only this group achieves. That way we'll reduce the achievement gap. Could you imagine how absurd and preposterous that would be? Could you imagine how livid you would be if you were a parent of a kid in this group and you're saying, look, we're going to halt your kid's development, right? And we're going to like even maybe try to actively reduce their development so we can minimize the achievement gap. The reducing the gap is the wrong focus. It should be, my goal as a teacher is to teach kids cool stuff that one day they will use, and also is to raise the achievement of every single student. I'm not interested in reducing gaps between groups of students. Here's another reason why I'm not interested in that. What groups are we talking about here? I've deliberately been vague up until now. What do we want to talk about? Do we want to reduce the gap between boys and girls? Do we want to reduce the gap between racial differences, between socioeconomic status? What about marital status? What about the number of siblings they've had? What about their IQ levels? What about their working memory capacity? What about the fact if they were breastfed or not? What about how many hours they were read to as a kid? What about, the list goes on and on and on of the possible ways in which we could group students and find noticeable achievement gaps. So which gaps do we focus on? I don't know. Now, when you break it down into so many different groups, you go, well, probably better just to deal with the individual kid, right? And then voila, you've got it. And that's what I'm interested in, which is ironic because a lot of this achievement gap stuff comes from that same field of education that's saying we should individualize our teaching, but yeah, we should treat kids differently, or we should focus on the groups from which they belong to. I'm not interested in it, okay? I'm interested in teaching cool stuff to these students and helping every single kid that I teach achieve. I don't care what group they belong to. Another reason why, again, I'm talking all about this from the practical lens. Don't get me wrong, when I see achievement gaps, I think, oh man, that sucks. But when I think through the practical reality of what I'm going to do about it, I'm stuck. I'm stumped. Help me out here in the comments. Okay, so I'm not interested in reducing the gaps. Okay, I'm interested in raising achievement of all kids. I don't know what groups to focus on. I also don't know in which areas we should focus on the gaps. Are we talking about gaps in sport achievement, in extra like music, arts, numeracy, literacy? What are we talking about? So are we going to break it down by a whole bunch of different groups and across a whole different subjects? Like, let's have a look at that data, and then what do you get? Well, you get maybe different teachers are now focusing on different groups based on the different subjects. So aren't you better off just to do the best job you can teaching your subject to the kids in front of you? Yeah, that's what I'm arguing here. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't be concerned. If you want to be concerned about achievement gaps, that's fine, that's great, go for it. But it's not going to affect anything that I do in my classroom to try to actively reduce these gaps. Let's talk about boys and girls, okay? For example, if we're saying, okay, boys are underachieving girls, well, am I now just suddenly going to have an explicit bias and favor the boys in my classroom at the expense of the girls, right? It doesn't make sense, and I wouldn't do that, ever. I wouldn't treat kids differently based on the group they belong to, so I want to reduce these gaps. Okay, so I hope I'm making a pretty, well, I don't hope I'm making a logical case at all. My job here is not to convince you. I'm just sort of saying what I feel and how I approach this when I think through it rationally and logically. And then so you might see you agree or you disagree. That's cool. But I just want to articulate it right now, why I'm not really that interested in the achievement gap. Now, another reason why I'm not interested in the achievement gap is because if you look at a gap like this, Okay, how are we measuring achievement? Okay, that's one big question we have. And again, so we say the achievement gap. There's multiple achievement gaps. Okay, I've addressed those issues. But also, why do they exist? Right? Now, if these gaps exist, if someone can come into my classroom and say, there's a gap in achievement based on students in your class because of specific things that you were doing as a teacher. All right, cool, help me out. All right, let's look at it. And I would be asking, okay, how can I change so I can raise the achievement of all my students, right? What are the easy ways I can do that is gonna help all my students learn? And if I'm doing something that's helping one group and not helping another, and someone gives me that specific feedback, well, sure, I'll adopt it. I'll be willing. I'll listen to it. Fantastic, yeah, cool. And I'm interested in learning that generally. But the reasons why any of these gaps exist between socioeconomic status, gender, race, right, like marital status, is so complex and so beyond my realm of control as a teacher that I can't worry about it because I can't control it. I don't worry about things I can't control. That's just how I operate. I worry about the things I can control, which is my content and how I teach it, right? And the feedback and my interactions with my students. That's what I can control. I don't worry about what's happening in my students' lives. Really, genuinely, I can't. I would love to be able to worry about what's happening in my students' lives beyond my classroom, but I can't. I can just worry about the care that I give them when they get there. The reasons why these gaps exist are so multifaceted, variable. There's so many reasons why they exist. Again, that I can't control it, right? Is it what happened in the first few years of life? Is it, some people would say, well, it's because of, historical differences and societal injustices and systemic this and that and the other, and go, okay, but I can't focus on that. I'm not going to worry about that because I can't control it, right? And if that's your bag and mission, great, fantastic, go for it. I'm not that interested, frankly. Okay, now, again, let's think about boys and girls here at university. I just now watched a video about, how boys are dropping out of university and girls are doing much better. And some people say, well, isn't this great for the girls out performing the boys? Finally, maybe some would say, or the boys, what are we going to do about these boys dropping out? My first question is, well, why are they dropping out? Is it a bad thing that they're dropping out? And if you would survey 100 of those boys, you'd get 100 different reasons why they're dropping out. Again, which goes like, aren't we best just to treat these kids individually, right? And that's where I land on it. Because if ever I try to oversimplify this problem, and this is how we think, and it's natural that we go, here is a problem, I'm going to categorize it, and I'm going to make it simple to comprehend and understand. There's a difference in achievement, we have to do something about it. That's the first step. But if you end with that, well, you're missing out the next big step in thinking, which is breaking down and answering a whole bunch of questions like, okay, why does that gap exist and what are we going to do about it? And when you go through that thought experiment, you get to the conclusion I've got, was that it's impossible to try to focus on these gaps, and actually it's detrimental to focus on gaps based on groups. Focus on the achievement of individual students. I don't know if I made my case there. It sounds, even for me, it's nerve-wracking expressing this in a channel called Teacher Geeks and saying, I'm not interested in reducing the achievement gap between students. But when I go through the thought experiment of what that might actually practically look like and how that would influence my day-to-day teaching, I can't come to any other conclusion except I just want to raise the achievement of every single student that I teach, regardless of the group that they belong to. Thanks.